I felt like it was way harder to be a Christian at the Christian school than it was in public school.
You can totally miss the purpose of those words in the Bible.
Sometimes there's a subject that I'm very excited about, and I'm like, this is so good. And you don't get anything from the congregants. And there'll be a message that I'm like, man, that was rough. I really hated what I did. And people are like, that was so awesome. God was really speaking to me through it. It's so backwards.
Really good hearts, but not a lot of great execution.
Some of our favorite stuff that we post is not the stuff that reaches. I'm not really trying to show the people I'm reaching my notes yet.
There seems to be a disconnect on your vocation can be what you're called to do, and there is ministry in that.
That there are people out there that are wrestling with their relationship with God.
All right, guys, welcome to the Done by Thursday podcast. Today we have an amazing guest with us, Jacob Hayes. He's a creative director for a church out in one of the Carolinas. So Jacob, we met through an Instagram DM, which is pretty wild. That's how relationships are made these days.
That's right.
But I saw your stuff and I was like, dude, this guy's got some good content in this space of working with churches and people. You see a lot of people, really good hearts, but not a lot of great execution. It's always nice whenever you could see somebody who's like, clearly you know what works and you know how to make your skill set improve the church, not just like from a visual perspective and a heart perspective, but also is clear from a structural and even just impact. And I've seen your Instagram following grow, which has been phenomenal to watch, and your content has continuously like gotten better. So I'm just curious, tell me your background. Were you born in church, or how did you get involved in the church space? You're a creative director now. What does your role look like? How has it evolved over the years?
Yeah, so I would say I was a church kid growing up. I say I'm a Baptist-costal because I grew up in the Midwest. Probably every 3 years, my family would switch from like Assembly of God to Baptist. This is like literally. So I had a lot of the back and forth. And then in my high school years, I was really involved in a Baptist church through those years. But then my uncle was part of an AG church. And so I literally went simultaneously. And then that's around when I felt like, oh, maybe I'll go study ministry. Because I'd always planned to like be in the arts. I want to be an architect specifically, actually. So yeah, I felt like the Lord was leading me to that. And so I went to Union University, which is a Baptist school in Jackson, Tennessee. And so there I maybe got the lowbrow theology degree. I got the Christian ministry missions instead of biblical studies.
That's right.
Most of the guys I know from that program never went to ministry, especially the ones in biblical studies. So I was way more like, I'm just going to go do it. And then I made the fateful decision. I was like, well, I could just minor in art. That'd be easy. And that turned out to be a great decision, but probably the hardest thing I could have done because studio hours, if you take a 3 credit hour class, it's 6 hours. So I pretty much feel like I double majored in that sense. And that's kind of where I started dabbling in graphic design because before I just liked art, but that's where it kind of clicked. So from there, after I graduated, which was in 15, I got hired maybe like a year later at the church I work now, which I had interned. And I really only interned because my parents moved from Illinois to North Carolina. So I was like, sure, I'll give it a go. And yeah, so I got hired on as one of our campuses at the time as the youth pastor of that campus. So I spent about 3 years kind of working for like a church staff of, 30, 40 people, but also just with my campus pastor. So I kind of had that dynamic. So then naturally I'm like also the associate pastor and the worship leader and the graphic designer and all the things. Did that for 3 years and then moved over to our central campus. And then I became over the youth staff. So then I fluctuated between 2 to 4 youth staff members and ran that, as well as started a conference in that time. All this while doing design media stuff for youth, for the campus, and kind of started more freelance branding, which was kind of just a whole other journey. And then right up close to 3 years ago now, some of our staff moved around and I was like, hey, maybe I could step into creative. I got the leadership experience and they took a risk on me and yeah, just never looked back. So I started that with 2 staff members and now I'm up to being over 6 in creative and production and we're just running and gunning. We got a service tonight. So,
That's awesome, dude.
Yeah.
I love that.
So I'm finishing
awesome.
my 10th year in the moment.
Wow, that's amazing. So just backtracking real quick, you're from Illinois. Are you a Bears fan then?
No, I was a Rams fan growing up, but they also ditched us. So now I'm just
So you must be a real big fan of Da Pope, huh?
I give it up. I keep up the Cardinals as much as I can, but it's got too many little kids.
You're
Baseball, not football.
okay. Well, we're Cubs in this house, so I don't know. Might have to
That's all
stop
right.
the podcast. Might have to stop the podcast right here, actually, Jacob, after that comment.
Yeah, it's funny in that
That's awesome.
region, most people I feel like won't like any Chicago teams, even if we didn't have one. It's like the Rams left. Okay, I guess we have to like the Chiefs now or something. I don't know why
Right,
that's how that was.
like we're not doing that at all.
Yeah.
So super excited for this. Kind of, going into your background, whenever you came into the church position, how did you go from, okay, I want to be an architect and I'm going to minor in art, to I'm working interning at the church. I think maybe now I want to go full ministry work. What was that transition like? How did you feel in that process, and what made that change for you?
Yeah, well, I'd say that was even more in the high school realm. I was at a pretty big high school, like 2,500 students, and I became like the president of our FCA freshman year. A guy was discipling me and was like, "Hey, this is a cool program. I don't know that these students really love the Lord. It's more about sports, and maybe you could lead it." And I just took that a little too serious, and so I became president of it one day. And because it was a wealthier school, not my family, but I mean, we even had like a little auditorium for it. So
Okay.
on my senior year, I was like a mini youth pastor of like 80 students weekly at FCA. So that was happening simultaneous to like, yeah, I'm going to become an architect because my parents built homes, but that was also during the housing crisis. So, I think that was the Lord like, maybe you shouldn't do that. So during that season is when I was like, well, maybe I'll look at this school and maybe I could just go study ministry there. And once I decided to, I felt like the wrestle was way deeper when I was in college, because despite being in a Christian school, having come from a public school growing up the whole time, I felt like it was way harder to be a Christian at the Christian school than it was in public school, in my experience. So being there to, study ministry, that was tough because, one day I'm locked in. Yeah, I'm going to go do this. And then the next, it felt like, do I even believe in this? Even though I'm investing all my effort into this. And in a lot of ways, art was a kind of a little reprieve from that, because there were spiritual aspects, but it wasn't, my own faith wasn't deciding if that was valuable time, But really, I feel like that was the Lord keeping his hand on my life in that season, to not want to just ditch the plan. Because by the time I finished, most of my friends moved to Nashville, kind of on the cusp of it really blowing up. So I was like, yeah, we'll do that. And I just decided to see if I could make the church thing work. I wanted to get married to my now wife. And looking back, I think I was preserved from a lot of hurt that some other friends went through by kind of stepping away from their faith in that. But the art part always was this lingering, what do I do with that thing?
Cool. Yeah, I know that the university's time for a lot of people is definitely, I mean, even just in liberal schools, obviously we see that. But I think you bring up a really good point for people who go into a Christian university or a Christian school thinking, okay, I'm gonna go in this major. And I had a friend talk to me one time. He was going in for he's going to ORU, and he was going to go for a ministry degree. I think it was youth and family ministry as well, which is Sam's degree. And as he was in like his first year, he was like, I don't want to do this major anymore. If to him it was almost too much, and he wasn't in the position to evaluate his faith at that level. And it definitely like messed with his walk for a little bit, and he had to take a step back. And I think he actually ended up in my degree, which was international community development. So a little bit different, but the heart is there. It's just not ministry focused. So it's interesting. It's an interesting point you bring up on that. I think a lot of people think they go into church schools and they're like, oh, this is going to be great. And then it doesn't always necessarily pan out that way.
Yeah. And then, like I said, I interned because I just had an opportunity, and that was between my junior, senior year. And I feel like that really solidified, like, no, I should do this. Nevertheless, all of my ministry professors were like, hey, go get your MDiv. You have to do that. In the Baptist world, that's like, you have to. And then my art professors were like, just major in graphic design and maybe you'll go to ministry also. So I felt very pulled there. And honestly, in that season, I had no idea why I was doing that. And I really didn't feel like I figured that out till like the last 2 years, where I'm like, okay, that was logical. It didn't feel logical then. And I kind of breezed over this, but between graduating and then starting that job was a full year. So I was a year working Old Navy. I became a merchandising manager for the kids department, I should say. And my wife and I had a 2-year plan because she had a contract at the hospital, and it was like, when the 2 years are up, we're out of here. We're moving to Nashville. So I got hired 1 year into the 2-year plan, and now I'm still here. But at that time, I was like, I guess I'm not going into ministry right now, and maybe that's for later. So that's how God works.
Yeah. I think it's another interesting thing here. A lot of times I'm curious your take on this as being a creative, and then you probably have some people reaching out to you because I know you possibly serve some small businesses now.
Yeah.
What is it in the ministry space? There's a lot of times where we only see the people on stage and we think that's ministry.
Yeah.
For the whole encompassing like body of Christ, or, what is your take on ministry outside of stage or outside of the walls of the church? And just curious what your thoughts are on that concept.
Yeah, and it's funny. I even made the page you found me through to make more content. It was like more for small businesses. It just happened that apparently the church knowledge I had interest, and I really had no intention of making a like, here's what you should do for your church. But then I just started dabbling, and it was like, oh, people need help. So that's been cool. But yeah, so I think I really wrestled with the whole calling and then the expectation of being a pastor. That was really hard on me. And I did that for 7 years. And in the Baptist space, and just, I love the Baptists. I'm not anti-Baptist. They are like super pro, like you're called to be worship pastor, missionary, whatever. And I just always was like, maybe I am. I don't know. And so I think for me, the longer I youth pastored, and I had to wrestle with calling for the students because they're graduating and they're wrestling with the same question, but at a younger age, I lean way more and more like, all right, like we're just called to be in Christ, and we're supposed to represent him, and ministering on his behalf is all a part of that. And I just think I just became far less consumed with this like career profession is calling. I try not to lump those too much together because it's super seasonal too. Even I described a few seasons I've been in, and who knows how long I'll be in this one, but I just find a lot of freedom in like, all right, you're going to be in a season and a career might be a part of that, but like, what can you do to minister in those settings? So even with working with some small businesses, naturally I've attracted an entrepreneur or a business owner who is a believer because they're like, well, you identify with this wrestle. And so there's a whole other type of ministry there. Or my wife, who's been a nurse for a decade, I mean, that is a totally different type of ministry that I can't even stomach talking about sometimes because I get grossed out, So for me, I just try to like, because I work with young people a lot, and I just try not to overcomplicate this idea of like, even the term marketplace ministry, that's cool. I'm pro that, but I don't even try to push that idea because I don't want to it shouldn't have to be so segmented, There's not niches to ministry. It's just you can minister to someone. That's the blanket thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm a big like history buff. Like I love history, especially church history.
Yeah.
Because
I taught a class.
Did you?
For like 3 years to our discipleship school, History of Christianity.
Okay. Nice. Yeah. A lot of people just don't know church history, like a lot of basic stuff.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really fascinating to me is how the old world approached church and like normal life.
Yeah.
And I think it was due to possibly the lack of being able to read, right? So your average person necessarily couldn't read the Bible, but they could listen and see stories and hear and talk about it the same way. But then they had their profession that they did. And to them, they had to correlate your daily life to the church and to God. And so I don't know if it's just with the church industry that we have today, where you've got a lot of different types of churches you can go to, a lot of different things that can hit your specific need, which is wonderful. But there seems to be a disconnect on your vocation daily can be what you're called to do. And there is ministry in that. So I think it's a really good talking point for for your ministry and what you're working on with other businesses as well.
Yeah, that history, taking a history of Christianity class in college, to me was probably the most pivotal of classes. And I was asked like, hey, would you want to teach a class? And I was like, sure, can I do this? And I taught out of Turning Points by Mark Knoll, which it was written for lay people. It's not like, it is deep, but I think it's understandable. And the more I taught it, because I'm teaching this to like 18 to 22-year-olds. And like, for instance, they're in a discipleship school, like a master's commission type thing. And when we get to the part about monasteries and monks, I mean, they just identify a lot to that. But they wouldn't have thought of that before. And I grew up in St. Louis area where everyone I knew was Catholic. I mean, everybody. Being in Protestant circles where there's some Catholic angst there, I think studying the history of Christianity, you're like, okay, well, I still got to appreciate it because all my history comes from that, And so for me, I think I can appreciate that all different denominations, they have the parts of their practice that I would or wouldn't agree with, but a lot of these core things, and like, especially in regard to the arts, like they were doing the arts way before us non-denom mega churches got cameras, and there's just something to be said about, about that. Like, what were they doing with the arts and what can we learn from it,
Yeah. So curious, what's your take on art in the history of the church? How do you feel about art? Anything that stands out to you inspirationally?
Yeah, I mean, there was obviously this whole wrestle over iconography, like what's appropriate to be in the church. And I think where our buildings are now, the big box churches, as my dad would call it, we're like so anti. We're like, even we might not even have a cross to be seen anywhere, and that's not inherently helpful. Even the fact that like we're like a lot of these bigger churches don't have windows, So I think that like going back to what you were talking about with not being able to read, right? I think that the art focus was so big because of their lack of being able to read. And now we're so deep into like, well, everyone can read. Maybe we don't need to express it. But then that's why I think there's this creative bloom happening where like, turns out we still need to express this stuff through art. That's why we have bumper videos and we do stuff through social media, So I think what stands out to me is how they built the art into the building, really. Like that was like the key thing was like, it wasn't a pamphlet or here, take this painting home. It was just like there. And so if you went to your church, that was the place you would see the art built into the setting. And I think because of media, we're a little opposite. We're kind of like, we'll hide some art here, but we'll throw some to you if you want to get on Facebook. We might give you some art there. So I think just it inspires me to be like, oh, how can there be more art in the building? And I don't just mean like pictures of volunteers plastered on the wall. That's cool too. But could there be something that expresses something at a deeper level? That's what I've been wrestling with.
That's good. Because in my world, so focusing on fundraising and marketing and of church and stuff and operationally, volunteers, sometimes you say, hey, get pictures of the volunteers and testimonies out there. One, because you need to show what your church is doing, and that's great. But two, then it connects with the audience that's actually there and inspires them to be a part of what you're doing and be involved in that. But I think sometimes it can be taken as just a marketing ploy, where it's like, okay, we're just putting a picture up on the wall of this person smiling in a red Serve shirt because that's the color of the church colors.
Ours is red.
Is it red? So a lot of churches are. But at the end of the day, that's not what you're saying. It's not art. Like that's just telling a story, but it's not art. So what's the difference between telling a story and then having art actually involved?
I think it's just basically the separation of like communications and like creative arts, which is super bled together. So you can't actually separate them per se. But for instance, someone on my team who's over communications, her skill set really is in writing, like specifically poetry and stuff. So while on the one hand, a lot of work is about just making sure we're communicating clearly, the thing that like would excite her to create would be like writing a script or a piece of poetry or spoken word that's going to express something that you can't simply express. And those types of pieces is usually what excites us the most. Now, unfortunately, I see when our team really deep dives in trying to express some spiritual idea or church idea through art, it doesn't necessarily mean it reaches the furthest. It usually doesn't. If that type of stuff posted to like social media doesn't usually reach super well unless you just have a huge audience in the first place. And you just kind of got to be okay with that fact. And some of our favorite stuff that we post on a weekly basis is not the stuff that reaches. So for instance, like we'll take like some scriptures we've been learning in church and we've been doing something called verse and context where like, as a pastor, I feel comfortable to like look at the verse, kind of do some expository stuff on it and turn it into this like graphic slider where we really deep dive. That's probably not the thing getting more than 5 shares, but to us, it doesn't like we can't base what we make on the response always. Like we're going to do both. We're going to do the thing that communicates and reaches. And if we're doing that well, I feel like we have more room to also do the thing that's more artistic and hopefully reaches some other smaller audience. And just occasionally those things that you make then really does reach more people than you expected. But I think there's just a lot of fear in like going out on the limb to try it. And this applies to stuff you do in a service or print things or, it's across the board, but there really is a really fine line between something that I'm just like, you know what, this is communication and we got to stop overcomplicating. Let's get it out. Or like, hey, we have a little room here. Can we take it more into the arts? And we've had some misses with that for sure.
If you are trying to find the line between, okay, we're doing art, not necessarily just for art's sake, but as an expression of worship from the artist itself.
Yeah.
And then you're also making art for the church in a business setting. that's not church related, you could say, all right, that didn't make it. We're not putting that out because obviously it's not going to further the business. In a church setting, how do you balance between, hey, that's great as a form of expression of worship for yourself, but that's also not like what we're here to do today? Like how, especially with like leading an
Yeah.
artist that we're,
Yeah, I say like in multiple levels. Number one, you have like when I'm doing this with like students who are learning, and obviously that's much easier to kind of like that. This was just an exercise. So for instance, we have something called creative tracks. They meet with us once a week. There's different classes that happen, but I kind of do like the inspire time. So I'll usually give them a prompt that's like super wide open. So the last one was, all right, you need to make something that you were afraid to make. And we had people doing poetry, animation, someone wrote a song, but it was like, not because I told them to, right? I just opened up the boundary really wide, and then I was very surprised. But on the flip side, I could be like, "Hey," to this student, like, "I need this," and then they could really like drop the ball because they weren't excited about it. I feel like for staff, it's almost like the opposite problem. It's like, "I need this," and they'll kill it. And then if I open up the boundary really wide, it's almost like, "Ugh," like I don't know what to do with it. So I think as a creative director, my job is to cover the opening of the boundary. It's like to say, I want you to take this risk, and then I'll take the risk on deciding what to do with it after. And if we make it and it's just not the right thing to put out in the place we intended, we'll find a place. That's usually my goal. Is like we're not going to waste it, but maybe it's not the opener to this service. Maybe we put it somewhere else. So I don't think there's a ton of things that I just have to be like, we're not using it. But there is a lot that we have to like recycle or repurpose because it just didn't quite land what we envisioned. But I think the more that I've kind of opened the boundary of what's allowed to be made, the more fun it is. And that can only happen like when you have a bunch of systems to complete the stuff that you have to do so that you can open the boundary to have a little more fun. That's where trial rails come into. So
recently.
we've been dabbling with our church with it too, because it's just like a way to see like, could we make this type of content for the church, or would that be weird? I got one out right now.
I think that's the funny thing about making stuff in church is sometimes, one of the jobs that I do is I professionally write sermons for other pastors. But as a speaker, sometimes there's a subject that I'm very excited about. And I'm like, this is so good. It's going to land, and you don't get anything from the congregants. Like it's not hitting at all. And then there'll be a message that I'm like, man, that was rough. I really hated what I did. And people are like, that was so awesome. God was really speaking to me through it. And it's so backwards. I feel like every time that I think I'm going to succeed, I don't know if it's just like some spiritual law or something when it comes to making things in church, but it's like, if it's something that you're doing and you're thinking it's going to be really good, it almost never lands. Yep. I just think that's such an odd concept that I don't get it. I just know that it is the case and I accept it. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I've experienced that, especially a ton as a youth pastor. Thought I had the perfect example. It just totally missed. And then the thing I whipped up last second was like, they bring up still, You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. That's goofy, man. It's so silly. What a lot of what y'all, you taught church history, so you're familiar with Erasmus? Yeah. So I was just thinking quietly.
He was a heretic, right? Or they said?
No, well, not as much. We're talking, Athanasius is the one that was exiled like 6 or 7 times.
Yes,
he's the one who refuted the Christological heresies.
I was thinking of the Athanasius Arius thing. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Erasmus they call him the father of the humanities. And so it doesn't mean humanities, I think, in the way that we think of like being a humanitarian where you're like advocating for human rights.
Gotcha.
He was the guy who reintroduced the study of the arts and the sciences in theological settings. And so he was a big believer of the way and this was right around the time of Reformation, because Luther was really upset that he didn't take a stance. The Pope at the time was upset that he didn't take a stance in the other direction. He was trying to be friends on both sides, and he kind of got kicked for it because he didn't take a stand. But he believed that there was a gap in theological study at the time, because it was just, the belief was if you're studying anything besides the scriptures or the writings of the fathers or the saints, you're adding like almost a heretical level of interest into the other things. But he was the guy that was saying, no. And his whole thing was, we're missing things in theology because we're neglecting these other schools of thought. We're neglecting the writings of people. We're neglecting the thoughts in the mathematics. And because of his feelings that way, they kind of reintroduce the idea that maybe they are valuable assets to studying theology. Essentially, he's the starting point of what theological study is today, in the way that I think a lot of speakers and producers and creatives are able to relate, because he started tying theological study in with, hey, these are things that people are writing, these are things that people are saying. There's theology in math, there's theology in literature, and being able to look at how all of those things tie together. It really comes down to that one man. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I found, especially with the more, it's called more crunchy moms, that they can be pretty resistant to like wanting to connect. I don't know, being inspired by like real world stuff, and then that helps you understand scripture, right? And so like I was a like no Harry Potter kid. I wasn't allowed to watch it, but then I could watch Lord of the, which is okay.
I couldn't even watch Lord of the Rings, buddy. It's my mom was a whole flee from the appearance of evil.
Yeah, in my Baptist college, there was a Harry Potter class, a Harry Potter and the Gospel. I don't know why, but there was. I've always found it interesting that like,
they obviously went Southern Baptist then.
No, it was Union Super Southern Baptist. Yeah, but the guy who taught it, Dr. Poe, he's like related distantly to Edgar Allan Poe and like runs his foundation. So he's just a unique guy. He can get away with stuff. But the point is, like, he also taught a C.S. Lewis class I took, and like some people were able to like pencil their name in as like Christian approved art thought people like Tolkien or Lewis, who could tell the same type of fantasy story as like J.K. Rowling. But it's like, well, that's Christian, so it's good. They're expressing it,
Yeah.
And I always wrestle with that with like, a lot of my favorite music is like clearly people who have some Christian background, but are wrestling with that because they're wrestling like in a really clear, transparent way. Whereas some of the like K-Love versions of that is like a little too like, do you have problems? Like, are you just all perfect, And I just always wrestled with like knowing what to share my interests were, because I think some people get really like afraid of like dabbling in the like someone else's thought process who isn't just for sure a Christian, which I think it just reminded me of what you were saying about Erasmus and this idea of like, how can you look at these other subjects and learn about God from them?
Well, and I think, and this is maybe borrowing too much from where Paul was talking to the Greeks, and he was saying that you have this pedestal up to the unknown God, and he's using their theology then to minister the gospel. But I remember Chris Stapleton has this song, When I Get Drunk and Talk to God, and he talks about how he only is able to start praying when he's drunk because he's too ashamed when he's sober to approach God. And he's not saying it quite that reverently, but it's this idea that I only have the courage to talk to God when I'm drunk. And I was trying to like talk to my mom about the theology in that to me, and like she was like laughing at me because she's like, "Oh, you've never been drunk?" And I was like, "That you know of." And also, like, just hear what I'm saying. You know what I mean? It's just the idea that there are people out there that are wrestling with their relationship with God. And if we can kind of hear what the people who are in the middle of it are saying, we can have a platform to communicate a concept that I don't think we would otherwise be able to talk about. You know what I mean?
Have you guys heard of the idea of like Christian appropriation? This is like a big segment in that Turning Points book I was talking about. He's talking about kind of in the missions movement when a lot of missionaries were going to like Africa and seeing a lot of revival, and how missionaries in Africa, or let's say in Asian countries, would have to wrestle with like, do I just try to bring this exactly the European way, or do I try to understand the culture a little more and apply it? Kind of like what you were talking about, Paul, and the pedestal. And so a really good example from it is about a missionary who actually was like, became a slave, ended up in England, set free, became part of the Anglican church, and then was sent to be a missionary back to his people in a country in Africa. And because, culturally he knew it, he was able to like cross the barrier way better and saw a bunch of people come to faith. And so much so that they raised him up to be some level of a bishop, until the other guys came over and they were like, "Oh, no, you can't do it that way." And then they like stripped him of his title.
Heard that story.
Yeah. And so he goes through several examples of this idea, but it's basically like, is it inherently wrong to understand their culture and be like, okay, you carry totems, well, here's a cross, or like you're into witchcraft, well, here's cast out spirits, like really trying to reach them the thing that they're stuck on and reach them there. And that's always stood out to me. I've thought about that a lot.
There's a book, The 3D Gospel, and it talks about the different cultures and how they view society and theology. So there's like fear cultures and there's like justice cultures, and there's a third one. I can't remember because I read the book like 7 years ago. But it's the idea that you preach the gospel in a way that people understand. And from where I'm from, that's how you preach the gospel. You know what I mean? It's like if I'm trying to talk to a friend of mine who's like a scientist or whatever, I'm going to use more science analogies because that's where they live. You know what I mean? Or if I'm talking to somebody who's like a blue collar friend of mine, I'm just going to say everyday, regular people things because that's where they live. That's what they're going to understand. And so I think that's just the responsibility of the person who's been given the burden to teach, is to find a way to communicate it to the person who's listening. You know what I mean? So I see the value in it. And so I don't have the qualms that maybe somebody who is more of a pure theologian would have.
Yeah.
That's exactly what Christ did in all of his parable teaching and all the red words in the Gospels. I mean, you look at how he talks to the Pharisees, completely different than how he talked to anybody else, because it's what they understood. We talk about this a lot on this show, and me and Sam, and just in general conversation, is context of scripture that you're reading, and understanding the context behind what you're actually looking at is huge. You can totally miss the purpose of those words in the Bible. But I'm curious your thoughts on this concept of context in regards to art, in regards to what our call is with reaching people who are from different cultures and different backgrounds, and how much of where's the leeway in how we position the word, especially in social media today.
Whether it be print stuff you're putting out or pretty much anything that lives on the web, we're constantly having to kind of fight amongst ourselves to boil a message down to something that's understood outside of our context. And this is like we have several ministries of the church that I get to work with, and this is a constant conversation with them. It's like, all right, you are saying it this way, and that makes sense here. That doesn't mean it makes sense outside. So I think first it always starts at just language, because churches love branding. They love to call everything something. So let's say we have like a preview to be a part of our like school, like our discipleship school, and we name that something. Just because we threw a name on it doesn't mean that word means anything. Let's say you called it, I don't know, like a look. And you're like, yeah, you coming to look? Like, cool, that's cool. But like we could just say like college preview, and that's kind of reach a stranger better, right? So that's kind of like the most like base level. So then when it comes to like creating stuff for like an event that kind of has this brand and this name, I'm in this battle of like, all right, if what we're making is going to be like part of the experience there, it can be like super artistic and really like abstract, and that'll actually probably work. But if it's for the sake of like communicating about it and or promotion, it can't be that abstract, because we'll just lose them. And we think it's sick because we're like, dude, that's awesome. Some of the stuff we put out like that we think is so sick, every comment is just like a staff member, like, oh, great job. And that should tell you, well, like, if you're not reaching your audience, So yeah, that's like a constant battle, because you, as a creative, you want to do these, make it more artistic, but I'm always like communication first, art second in that regards. And then I think you can be way more artistic when someone's there and present. And then we can almost like miss that opportunity because we were so focused on the like promotion part. So how this plays out for me, at least, is like, let's say, so I helped run this camp that I founded called Movement Student Conference. And the temptation is, it's January, it's happening in June. We're going to spend all this time right now about the theme and all that. And that's good. We should be thinking about that already. But in reality, us communicating about the experience from the theme perspective really doesn't do anything for strangers. Like, it doesn't mean anything to them yet. Now we can start to film some content that expresses it without being like just saying it outright. But really the work towards like the theme should be like what we say for the actual experience. Because then once you're there, it'll all like connect. And then we can be super abstract and artistic with it, with any number of things. So we'll do dumb things. Like, we'll take the theme and kind of essentially parody them and turn those into games, Like, we had Behold the Lamb was a theme. Promoting Behold the Lamb to students on the internet, like, it doesn't mean anything. You're just like, come to the beach. That's what you promote, right? But at the camp, you can do like a dumb game where you're like, this one's called Beholding. And then you just like, how many of these items can you behold in one moment, And that like dives into reiterating a theme in a silly way. And the next thing you know, they're seeing like a very serious spoken word artistic video that we filmed about beholding the lamb that like takes them to kind of the next notch. And then hopefully the speaker dives in deeper, and all that's awesome, but still the outside communication just like can't be around that, I know a little while back, I think it was someone on a podcast who was related to Elevation got a bunch of flack for like how they promoted Easter and not wanting to use the word blood. And they were just basically saying like, that doesn't help reach the people. We're going to talk. He wasn't saying we won't talk about the blood at Easter. That's what was missed on people. They were just saying like, that's not the best communication tool term. And he's right. Like Jesus talks about it in the Bible. Like he's like, eat my flesh. It does not like come to church terminology, really. It's confusing to people.
Well, Jesus only said that whenever he had those 12 closest people next to him. He wasn't standing. The Sermon on the Mount didn't talk about the blood in my flesh.
Yeah.
It's the audience, right? So curious, your thoughts on this. So in Dallas Fort Worth, where I'm located, you drive down, there's like 2,500 churches within a 5-mile radius of each other. Feels like it. And so you're driving down the street and you see, all right, we're doing this sermon series, and you see it on these billboards. They put all of these banners out in front of the church, what their sermon series is. What are your thoughts on promoting a sermon series, making a banner outside the church, buying a billboard on the highway with your sermon series on there?
I think sermon series can be promoted, but not by the name of the sermon series. So, for instance, some of our most effective, like putting a banner outside the church, we usually have one, are the banners that are more like general statements. Like, a few months back, we made one that just literally said, we preach the Bible, we follow Jesus, something else. And like that got good response because it was just saying like core values, But we did a mental health series maybe 3 months ago, and same thing. It's like, how do you promote that? And at least that's a little easier to reference, but still a lot of our best success with that was like putting out what I try to refer to as like lateral content. So we laid out like 8 different kind of like mental health segments. And then I set up times with different leaders and pastors to like, all right, we're going to film a reel talking about your experience with this. And maybe it's anger or self-image or something. And we filmed those, and those were not promo per se. And they weren't even necessarily the exact topics that would be on the Sunday. And we just released those throughout the series, and they got like very good response from our people, like, oh, that's really encouraging. And so I try to think of like sermon series promo in the sense of creating lateral content that adds to the conversation instead of like tells you to like come check it out. Because that's especially social media, and that's what I'm trying to create. If you're talking like billboard or something, I think you can. I think it just needs to be way more like question prompt, like, like what does the Bible say about mental health? Like, if the mental health series is like covered by the blood, like it's just, that doesn't help the person that's like struggling with their mental health. They want to see like, what does the Bible say about mental health? I always try to frame it with a question, the question they're asking. Same as it's like Google SEO essentially.
Yeah.
And likewise, we, this isn't as easy, but we try to like find ways to do that with YouTube titles and thumbnails too. I'm sure and just takes a lot of work, and it takes, as a creative, it takes a level of trust from your pastor for him to allow you to reframe what he's trying to say. I'm lucky that we've built that relationship where there's total trust to reframe it. That's been great. But I don't think a lot of creatives have that trust to reframe it. And then that's why the promotion is so church branded and confusing to other people.
I was curious, for somebody who's on the outside and they're looking at, how do I toe the line between, you're using the example of your youth rally. What's the line that I walk between emphasizing the theme versus the event?
Yeah, I mean, like, let's say for the youth conference,
mm-hmm.
I would talk more about experience with Jesus in just a more like broader sense. So we're going to use language like students can know Jesus, and not anything about the Lamb or beholding the Lamb. Like, that's really what we're trying to say when we say behold the Lamb, like to have reverence for him, right? But I'm going to use language more like the next generation, can run after God. Statements like that.
Mm-hmm.
But visually, some mixture of like trying to show the experience and fun part, and then also not trying to shy away from the fact like, no, we're going to go after God here, audience. I think they're going to catch on quicker. Like, oh no, this really is about God. It's not just water, guns, and sandcastles, So it's a little bit of
Yeah.
both.
So what you're saying is when you're looking to promote an event or a sermon series or a church, what you want to do is ask, who am I trying to reach and how are they going to hear an invitation so that we can get them in the door without necessarily focusing on what we would want the experience to be like once they're here.
Yeah, 100%. It's like the difference of, you ever heard someone talking and they'll say like, sorry, I got off my notes, or I'm
Yeah.
lost, or, like, they don't have to tell you that. I can't see your notes.
Yeah.
I just think of it in the same terms of like, I'm not really trying to show the people I'm reaching my notes yet. They'll hear
Mhm.
that live. I'm just trying to give them it's a teaser trailer.
Yeah. No, it's good.
It's good. I was thinking, when you have you're a creative and you've also been a youth pastor, and so two questions. One is from each side, right? So if you're talking to a pastor, what's one thing that you could say if they're struggling with allowing a creative to market or present their sermon in a way, or their idea in a way that isn't necessarily them coming up with the idea themselves? A lot of pastors come up with the idea, they want everybody to run with that only.
Yeah.
What is your advice to them on how to and why they should trust somebody else to help with that?
Yeah. For one, I think a pastor essentially has to allow some room to test to see if the perspective the creative has works better. If it, you got to allow some room to like see if that's true. But secondly, I think the main way that they can build the like trust part to let them reframe it is that a lot of the conversations that they're having of what they're trying to get out is about things like mission statements and core values. I was literally just writing a post about this morning, but like most of what someone on social media or someone running socials for an organization, this could apply to business too, is dealing with is only ever making reactive content. So they're like, all right, the thing is coming up. I got to promote it based on what they said. The thing is happening. I got to show it. The thing happened. I got to recap it. Maybe even I'm not allowed to think of my own ideas, but this idea is proven. It's a trend on social media. So I'll recreate that. It's all reactive and that's all good. That's all normal, right? But the only way I think you can move to like proactive is if you know the core value and the mission. So I think for me, why that was so obvious or natural is because if you run a ministry for a church, that all you do is proactive. You're running the youth ministry, they're doing a mental health series in big church, and now you need to find a way to apply that in your setting and make like the lateral version for youth students. And if you just want to live a life of like, we'll copy them from the previous Sunday to this Wednesday, that's miserable, So you're just trying to be like, okay, what's kind of the core thing you're trying to do? Cool. We're going to go make our own version of that. And that's really what social media should be as a creative. But I think there's a lot of like fear to do that. And so the pastor creative dynamic has to be closer. It can't just exist through emails and through occasional like, how's the video doing? It's got to be way more collaborative. A lot of that success for our team, and this applies to all the pastors, so any ministry leader, is through discovery meetings, which is not something I came up with. This is stuff that was mentored to me through a conference I was at. All right. But it's taking the time up front to have, however often you want to do this, these meetings that we call discovery meetings, where we're going to ask a lot of these core questions. And it's not about deciding what we're going to do. It's just about like trying to understand the heart of what they're trying to do. And the more we've done that, the more we're like already ahead of them. Like they come to us and we're like, yeah, we've already thought about it. And here's our pitch. And they're like, great, you understand me because we've been discovering with them, So that's been like a super key part of our process. And that only really came about because I was a youth pastor who felt like no one ever discovered with me. I just was like on my own. So I'm trying to like flip that, who did I want to help me,
I worked at a big church and we used to have to we chose to write our own curriculum because we hated everything that was being offered. And so, we wrote like the sermon series, small groups, etc., for like the whole programming a year in advance. And I wanted to do this like 2 or 3 week series on the idea of that old hymn, "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing." There's that line, "Let thy goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee." And I really, really liked that. And I wanted to name the series Like a Fetter, because that was like the part that stands out. Like that's the core of that statement. Could not get anybody on board with the idea of like a feder. They're like, I don't think the students are going to know what that means. And I was like, that's what your job is, to tell them what a feder is and why it's relevant to them. You know what I mean? It was like, I couldn't get anybody on board with me to collaborate the idea of, I was like, you don't have to say it exactly this way. Like, you don't have to, you don't read it straight from the page. I hope that you're like reading it and digesting it and communicating that in a way that's authentic to you. But for you, who I guess went somewhere to a conference with Life Church, you discovered this idea of the discovery meeting. Was that something you had to pitch to your lead pastor, with the idea of let's you and me talk, and, you know, the team talk about what it is that you're wanting to communicate so that we can help you and rounding out that communication?
Yeah, I would say at the time I kind of pitched like, here's some process. This was like more to my executive pastor at the time, but and I was like, yeah, go ahead. And so we started to work it out. Like how this looked in reality was, we went to SALT conference. I don't know if you've heard of that. And they were some of the speakers, and I just started asking questions, and then we ate lunch, and I was like, oh, wow, like this, we need this help. We came back and just went like full force into like, we're going to just try this and like see how it works. So kind of how this looked is like, number one, we put a lot of work into our creative requests, which is like a planning center form that people can fill out, or the ministry leaders fill out, and trying to change that form to be more geared towards the like what they're trying to achieve, not what they think they need from us. So try to remove a little less expectation of like deliverable versus need, which is something I talk a lot on my page about, is just like, don't tell me you need a video, tell me you need to communicate about this. And then I'll try to help you figure out what you need. I'm sure you guys are familiar. So that was like step one. Then we had a discovery meeting with every single ministry leader where we'd ask the same like 6 questions and kind of see what happened. And we did that. And that took a long time to have all those meetings. And then it started to become the trend where like, okay, if you have a request come in that's for a new event, something we haven't done before, that requires a discovery meeting after, because we should take some time to discover. So then the kind of step 2 from there, once those were going good and people were catching on, they're like, okay, we don't have to decide in this setting yet. My team has the like ideation phase where we try to figure out the solutions, right? And then we try to type up a document of kind of the pitch, essentially. And then we have our follow-up meeting. And in all of these settings, less people better. So that's my general rule. But we have our follow-up meeting where we're like, hey, here's some of the things we think that could work. And usually because we're the only ones who have continued to think about it and come up with solutions, there's very little resistance to those answers, because honestly, they feel blessed by it. It's like, oh, wow, you took the time to come up with some solutions. And usually they're solutions that maybe weren't exactly their first thought, but seem helpful. You know, we make our compromises on the stuff, and then we try to lay that all down at kind of our brief of what we're going to do. We use Basecamp as our project management. And from there, then we start to do it. And really between the like pitch approval and the like, here's a deliverable, we try not to include them in the work a ton outside of like, here, approve this, because I just find that trying to show someone a half-done thing and get their opinion, you will just kill it too soon. You know, you got to reach the end and tell me. We were able to troubleshoot all that more with our ministries, and as we dialed it in even more, it made more sense with like our lead pastor and stuff. So same type of process. I would just say the difference being that like that discovery part, I'm trying to work in anytime I can. It's not always a meeting. It's just like, is there an opportunity we could talk about this? And it's been really fruitful. So even we're about to have like our first kind of discovery of Easter, but an idea was brought to me like this last week that I thought was great. And that's what I've been trying to foster, is like, I'll bring ideas, but I'd rather go off the thing someone was passionate about before it was just like my idea, you know? So
yeah, I think it's a sign of a good leader too. The ability to listen to people around you, present that, and then realize that's what needs to be said, rather than just, hey, I've got this cool concept, we should go with it. And then trying to get everybody else on board. That's cool.
I always tell people, if you just have it written down and prepared, odds are it might get approved, because at least in my church setting, like we're just busy, you know, like not everyone has time to write down a thorough idea. And so if you have it written down and super clear, it's going to be close to that by the end.
Yeah. With, on the other side of this, we talked about how do you get a pastor, or what would you say to a pastor to say, hey, I got to trust. Now from a creative, how do you what would your advice be to a creative on how to build trust for the pastor to continue that relationship and even start that conversation in the first place?
Yeah. I think that creatives really we all gotta swallow our pride a lot more, and to give opportunity or give the chance that the ministry leader or pastor's idea is actually pretty good. I think there's a tendency to just assume it's going to not be the right choice. So I think the more you can create a culture of like the thing that they're going to present might be the thing. I just got to reframe it. It becomes way more healthy. So it's never like cast it down. And more importantly, creating a culture where creatives aren't afraid of brainstorming because they're afraid of more work. That's what I think like is a plague in church ministry work is this feeling of like, I'm afraid to bring it up because if I do, more is going to be added to my plate. That's just a horrible place to be, honestly. It's helpful for nobody. Because then good ideas are missed, right? Like there was a good idea, but I have too much to do. So by having a more discovery process, you create a healthier way to do that without having to commit to anything. And that's where the problem lies. It's having settings where you're going to dream and you have to decide in that moment if that's the decision. And then everyone's stressed and everyone's afraid to actually say their ideas. So by separating the two, the pitch and the discovery, it removes all this feeling of like, oh, I don't know if I want to say this because I might have to work overtime to make this happen. Because instead you get to go back and sit with your team, talk about it more, discover if it is something that's plausible. You can remove it from being all practical conversation and more just like big picture. So I know I'm kind of rambling about a couple of different things, but
no, it's good stuff.
Really just fostering a healthy brainstorm culture. So we're brainstorming. All ideas could be good. All ideas are welcome. Nothing has to happen. That's kind of my vibe.
That's a really good phrase right there is that, nothing has to happen.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing you say, and it sounds very similar from the pastor side and the creative side, it's very similar things that have to happen here. And so what I'm hearing is that the pastor in both sides and the creative, they need to, one, put down the ego. They can be right or they can be wrong in the situation. Two, they need to be willing to serve the community that they're in. So listening to what's actually going to hit with the audience as well as what the organization wants to put out. So organization isn't just the top, it's all the people that work there. But then also realizing the roles within that. The pastor is ultimately in that position because you trust him to be there or her to be there. For that, there needs to come a level of like, okay, you're the leader. If this is ultimately what God's really telling you to do, then we're going to have to lay down what our ego is saying and do that. But then the pastor has to say, okay, if God has put you to work here and be in this place with me, and I trust that you're here for that reason, then I have to be willing to listen to that as well. So a lot of communication and a lot of teamwork is necessary. Now, with that, we were talking about maybe teams of bigger churches. What about for those teams that are small, where maybe everybody's bivocational, or maybe you don't have a big team. Maybe you have a pastor, a children's lead who's on a stipend, and then you've got volunteers. How do you kind of navigate between different sizes of teams within that?
Yeah, I've thought about a lot of the people I've talked to online, that's becoming really evident of like is team size affects application a lot. First, I'd say no matter staff size, putting an early focus on like key volunteers to be a part of these conversations is probably like my top priority, I guess. I probably could relate to that more with ministries because you have like a ministry leader, staff or not, who's really trying to achieve some high level creative stuff. And it's probably not mostly my staff who can do all the things. And so I'm working more alongside like a volunteer or a few volunteers. So we try to get those volunteers who want to take the next step in those settings too, in those meetings. Like one of my goals is that every ministry has like a creative trained by us that is a volunteer helping them, especially helping them run their social media. We have not succeeded across the board yet, but we've gotten a few in place and it's been cool. It's been rewarding. But I say that to say, you got to get the people in the room in these conversations who are actually like present and understand the goals, right? So that's why I can't say like a blanket, like here's who should be there thing, because it really just depends on the church. But I think most pastors and or this communications creative person has a pretty good idea of like the other people, volunteers or staff, bivocational, who would like have it'd be a helpful contribution to the conversation. And I think we can kind of disregard the fact that there might be just some key volunteers that do that and there's no staff, but it's the same trust conversation. It all still boils back to like, could you trust a volunteer to run your socials full time and do a really great job? You definitely. Can you expect the same thing as like a staff member to do it? No, it's just, there's not even a chance unless you have a much broader volunteer team. That's just how it is. So yeah, I think for the smaller churches, like you got to still find that person in your church who has the experience outside of church, who's going to like, and you got to listen to their wisdom too, to be like, hey, I know I just do this for a hamburger joint, but like it works for us. And can we apply some of these principles at church? And I think that's gonna be a little bit of a scary thing, but that might be the answer for a lot of these churches is like that person who runs social for that coffee shop that does really good. They might be the perfect person to help you do some of your creative needs. Luckily, social media is like a great foundation person because they might understand video somewhat or design somewhat or communication somewhat. So it's like more obvious that they might do it versus like, well, this guy he prints t-shirts. He might be helpful. I have no idea, but he maybe isn't inherently good at communication. It's not necessarily, but he might be.
So I worked at a bigger church, and I mean like 80 something staff members kind of church, and they had a whole media creative department. And in the youth department, we were required to outsource all of our creative things to them.
Yeah.
And which is cool, except for you had this whole form where you write out what it is that you're wanting. And it almost felt like early Chat GPT prompts where you would tell it like explicitly line by line exactly what you want. And it'd be like, you want this picture of a fish? And I'd be like, no, a dolphin. And they're like, you want a picture of a fish with a dolphin face on it? And I'm like, no, just like a dolphin. You know what I mean? It was just like this whole like 6 or 7 revisions. This is like, I'm telling you explicitly, hey, this is what I want on that t-shirt. This is the color I want it to be, sort of thing. And I felt like there was always a disconnect. And so like on that side of things, as the person who's not the creative, so to say, it would have been an uphill battle for me to trust someone to produce. Like if I had the green light to like make my own t-shirts 100%, I would have guessed that. And so for you as the creative, do you have any advice on what it takes to really hear the heart of what the pastor or whoever is kind of doing the leading there is looking for, so that there is a built trust to really hand those things over? Because I think that can be a struggle. You know what I mean? This is exactly what I'm envisioning. How do you get inside that person's head and really say, I'm going to support you in this fashion?
Yeah. So since I had an art background, we had the same system, but over those like 7 years, when I first got hired, like on my job description, like one line, it's like, you'll work with the creative team, And so luckily for me, over the years, I built trust as a youth pastor that I had the chops to make things, right? So by the end of that era, we never requested anything. The youth team, which was essentially me being provided ideas for my team, made all things. So for our conference, I made the branding and I made the merch and I made the videos, all the stuff, right? And honestly, it was sick because we got exactly what we wanted. So now being on the other side, and this is taking time, we're super training focused. So yes, we still have requests. We still all this. We got to go through the processes, all that. But what excites us is being way more about who can we equip amongst your people to do it more directly and faster for you. And so now at this point, a lot of the requests we get for the ministries are like the things that are just harder to do. But a lot of the creative things the ministries do through people that we've been equipping. So just to lay this out a little broader, I mentioned a discipleship school. That's like 17, 18 students. And they were always creative people, but never really like doing things like that. And so we really doubled down our creative team, staff, and like, we got to train these people and like help them to do stuff. So we've seen a ton of fruit there of like I have 2 second-year students and I have a third-year student who are like with me quite a lot. And they're providing a lot of those needs more fast, hands-on. Now I have several staff members. I'm talking like 7 or 8 who are like using Adobe Premiere and cameras now because they want to make stuff, but it's because they sit in our offices and learn from us. So we have a very open door policy. It's like literally in our section of the building, like, you need help with something? I would rather you come bother us for the help than us be behind on your request. Like, we'll help you right now. Edit that thing. You're doing it. So on the ministry side, we've been super focused on trying to train up people within the ministry to do it so that they don't have to wait on us. But it's a mutual thing because like the more we train them, the more they respect what we're giving them and they come back to us and they're really like valuing our proofing of it all, And that's been like really cool to see. But this takes a lot of time to build, obviously. But to circle back to some of because you were asking about like trust, right? Like building the trust part. I just think how do I put it? When I am showing a ministry leader that I would trust their person, then they trust me because I'm like, I'm a strong believer of like, if someone could do it 80% as good as you could do it, just let them do it. And it'll be 20% worse, but it happens, right? So it just seems like each time we do that and we allow the person to do it slightly worse than we could, that person just improves anyway. And then the leader trusts us more. Or maybe that it is the leader I'm allowing to do it and they trust us because we've equipped them. So it's like very back and forth in that sense. And it just takes time and commitment and an actual open door, you know? It can't be like a fake, like, yeah, come by anytime. And then you're like, don't bother us.
How do you build a culture like that?
Ooh, it's hard. I mean, for me, I lucked out in the sense of like, I started with like 2 staff members there, and then each one I've added has just kind of been like folded into that attitude. So on the front end, it was a little bit of like reversing some culture that was there of like, don't bother us and don't ask us for more. But I think by really, because I like teaching, by really pushing my team to be teachers, to have opportunities to equip and teach, they naturally become more passionate about it. And then I have to be super like vocal about like, hey, this person came by earlier and they need help with this. I want you to stop what you're doing and go help them. And like showing them that like that is the priority. Like the priority isn't finishing the project you had up on your screen. It's actually stopping that and going to go help them, which sometimes could stress them out. You know, it's like, well, I need to do this, but I'm like, well, cool, but I cover your work. I cover when it needs to be done. So if I say you can pause and go do this, then you're great, you know? And that takes a lot of time to like convince them. Like, I think it almost all boils down to covering. It's like you, the creator, is not going to get in trouble if this thing's not done or whatever, because I said to stop, go do this other thing. And I'll take the blow if somehow we're wrong. And that I have to like try to live that out and be true about that.
That's interesting. So I think my experience with creatives is that their brains can go a million different directions at any time, and trying to hone that in to say, okay, this is our goal. And then what it sounds like you're also saying is then there also has to be flexibility in that to say, well, stop doing that. And also then trigger that part of your brain again. So I could see in a creative space that be a real dichotomy for them to like, you told me not to, now you're telling me to do it. Now you're telling me not to do it. What's the balance here? And I could imagine that gets frustrating for people. Or
I think the balance is people over excellence. And we just talk all the time about like, I want you to value who's standing in front of you more than the work that you're going to need to do. I, as a leader, have to then be okay with sometimes things getting slowed down, or I literally am like watching from my office, someone's been talking for 30, 40 minutes and me not be the like, then go back on what I said. So that's where I was talking about the covering part. Like, I really have to eat my own words about it and allow the interruption, and then keep reevaluating like what part of that's working or not, what parts are becoming distracting, what members of my team can't handle that really well, because some can handle it well and some it's really stressful. So that is super specific to the person for sure. And I have to be really aware of like, actually, I know this person's stressed and they got to shut their door, you know, like, so like the door, I was kind of joking about the door, but like the door is legit. Like, I'm pretty much like, if the door's shut, don't bother him. If it's open, you can bother him. And we try to be open door as much as possible. But I know if a team member's like, I'm shutting my door, I'm going to steer someone away from bothering them so that the work can be done.
I think what you're saying is, one, remembering that people are people and they matter. And then 2, remembering that you're in ministry for people.
Yeah.
Too often, especially in big churches and big ministries, do we hear the same comment of, we're building a kingdom, sacrifices are kind of necessary. But then that doesn't always correlate whenever you see somebody's life fall apart because they've been in ministry for so long, or their family is no longer behind them because they've spent so much of their time sacrificing that.
Yeah.
What's your experience? You've been in ministry for a while. What's your experience seeing that unfold? And what are some pitfalls that you would, caution people on?
Personally, a few years ago, I was like deep in the pits. This is like before my creative transition. And I was like, didn't think I could do youth anymore. And I had a transition of my executive swapped. And as someone I knew for a while, but I just was like, he came in swinging like, here's the vision. And the first thing I was like, hey, I might not be here tomorrow. Like, I just don't know if I can keep doing this. And he was so patient and helpful in that, of being like, cool, like, let's just think about you and your family. Cause I think I just had like my first kid maybe. And no lie, like for probably a year of him being my leader, he almost never bothered me about the work. It was just constantly like, have you and your wife gone on a date? Do you have a trip coming up? Why are you here? You should go home. Like those like all the time. Like he didn't just say like family's more important. He was like, no, that was that. And he cared about my work, of course, but it was more, our relationship was more about that. And so I just learned a ton in that season about like, I can prioritize myself, not myself, but my family and my home life. And so even in making my change to creative, I elected to not stay a pastor in that sense. And a lot of people didn't get that, but I thought that it would be more helpful to my family. And I think a lot of people were like, maybe you'll be there more, but I was right. Like I was able to build a team and systems to where like, I don't have to always be present there, and it's been way better for my family. So because of that experience, I talking to staff all the time about like those dichotomies. So I feel like the number one thing is you got to ask. A lot of those schedule frustrations or overwork stuff, or like, hey, I've been having this dream and no one's listening. People actually don't really ever say it or ever ask about it, and they don't bring it back up or keep pushing on it. And then that's why they like feel frustrated. Something this leader I was referring to constantly was on me was like, always bring the change you want to see to the person who could actually change it. Like stop bringing it to the people who can't do anything about it. And I mean, I think about that all the time. It's like, church gossip culture and all that happens because we don't want to bring the thing we want to affect or change to the person who could change it. And then we just make it worse, honestly.
So he's saying we don't want to do what Paul says and bring it to your brother first.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you're young and intimidated, like the idea of bringing the thought to like your executive or your pastor is just like, ah. But the more I just was like, no, I guess that's what I need to do. And you find fruit in it. It's like, oh, okay, no, they're just people. We're all just people here. So yeah, for me, I think the boundary part is like, especially if you're married, if you have kids, like really knowing what your spouse wants out of it and what's exhausting her or him and what do you need to change, and then asking for it and not in a like, I deserve this way, but in like, hey, could we compromise about this part of my work? Like, because a lot of times what's been set in place that's just been set in place. It doesn't mean necessarily that your leader was like committed to that forever. We have a running joke of like, or maybe they don't, as in like, or maybe they don't think that, because people will say, this is this way because so-and-so wants it that way. And then we're like, well, maybe they don't want it that way. And then you go ask and they're like, I have no opinion on the matter. And you're like, oh, so we don't have to do that? No, cool. So
I like
a lot of the boundary stuff is just that. It's just asking.
You should get a coffee mug or a t-shirt that says, or maybe they don't.
I know.
That's
I
cool.
want to.
I like that. You get a bumper sticker. I don't know. That's a really good point in my team too. Like I'll have people, my assistant will come up to me and she's like, okay, I thought you wanted this. Like, I don't care. Is it getting done? Like if it gets done, then I could care less. And then sometimes there's a legit, like, yes, I've seen it historically done this way. That's why we're doing it that way. But I think it's cool whenever you have a whole team that understands just because it's been done this way doesn't mean that there's always a good reason behind it. It just means it worked for a season. And what brought you to where you're at, or what brought you to the church, brought the church to where they're at today, is not always going to be what takes you forward, or the team, or the strategies that take you to the next phase that you're going into. With that, I know we talked about like small churches, big churches, on a growing team, and they're trying to figure out, okay, what's my role that I need to fill? Like I'm a pastor, maybe we've got our youth, all of our pastoral roles are kind of filled. We got youth, kids, pastor, like those main three, or however, young adults, whatever your main pastor roles are, you've got those filled. Now we're looking to expand into creative or marketing or fundraising, like getting somebody specific for those roles. What do you think the skill sets they should be looking for are?
Well, I think kind of the first building block is something in terms of communications, probably before it's just like design or videographer. I think often it goes videographer first because of live streams and production. So that's totally logical. Unfortunately, I don't think in a lot of settings, the production person and like a filmmaker are the same people. They can be, but it's the same as like people wanting a youth pastor who's also a worship pastor. So I think you got to be really honest about like, just because I love these jobs to be combined doesn't mean that's true. And to some extent, if it works to have a few more part-time specific jobs instead of like just a couple full-time who you expect to do like 75 versions of things, you might have more success. And you can have more success doing that through, stipend contract work too, or a volunteer that really wants to go above and beyond. But regardless, to me, the like first step would probably be something in communication, and meaning that that person understands just how to communicate across several mediums. So, I mean, I think it's like a really basic understanding of web. Like in our day, it could just be like hire some kid to make a Squarespace site and just know how to update it. Like that's all you need. It doesn't, more is great. But if you're just a small church and you want to get started, that might be all you need. If you embrace something like Planning Center, it's learning the communications of all that, which often is more administrative. But for us, like we use Planning Center a ton to be like, we're really integrated with the calendar and registrations and all that. So we don't want to ignore that. And then I think social media wise, it could just be someone with an iPhone and this DJI $50 mic. It doesn't need to be that complicated, but they just have to like, in all of those things, they have to have a real, like, I'm also a minister with you, so that I'm not just only ever like, I don't want them to feel like they can't like talk about Jesus from their own point of view, I guess is what I'm getting at. Being able to add in stuff like real videography, photography, graphic design, all that is great goals, but not inherent. I think there's so many tools right now, things that you can buy as far as third parties that can design stuff for you, that those aren't like the immediate rush. I think often like your communication type person is going to start to connect those dots. And then as you mentioned like your church wrote the curriculum, like as you want to write the curriculum, you want to make the designs, that's when that stuff starts to add on. But I don't know that that's the first thing.
With the way that the world is right now, we're on social media all the time. And we talked about trying to find that right person or those volunteers to help you get creative, to be in that space, to get your message out there, to get more members into your church, ads, all of that stuff that goes into it. What do you say to a church leader who feels discouraged or behind when they see all of the churches growing and they're just like, I'm stuck at 40 people or I'm stuck at even 500 people, but we just aren't growing anymore? Like, what do you say to them?
Meaning the number of attendees would be
attendees, or just they're starting to feel like that nothing is progressing. They're watching everybody else grow and they just feel stuck.
Okay. I think a positive in regards to all the media talk is that there is truth to this idea that Gen Z is less concerned with the production value and the thrills. So that's like a net positive to like, you don't have to have all the tools actually. And I think that like if a church, in regards to what they want to put out online, if a church could really dial into like, here is the thing that we're teaching within our walls, and I want to build on top of that. You don't have to have all this wasted energy of trying to come up with something new, which is, I think, that's the overwhelm, is like, how do these churches come up with all this extra stuff to reach out and help them grow? Well, like that's like a multiplication thing, and that just comes later. On the front end, I think it's just saying like, all right, so for our church this year, we are going through the Old Testament in a year. That's what we're doing, which is cool. Not a very normal thing for us to do. So it's a new experience. In theory, on our media platforms, we could only ever talk about the Old Testament the whole year, and that would be fine with me. That's not like we failed or something. Now, I wouldn't only ever just want to recap and rehearse what's been talked about, but like, let's say this weekend we're in Genesis 18 through 30 or something. I'm going to try to like find something in there that wasn't as dialed into and try to expand the idea. And I think pastors are so equipped to do that. They just like don't view it that way. So you have a pastor of a small church, you're in this Old Testament series, and your sermon, like just take your 3 sermon points and record a 30-second reel about those 3 points and don't say any more and put it out, And I don't know, there's just this pressure, like, well, we got to have all the production and the filming. Like you could have no live stream and you could still put out stuff about what you're teaching and equipping in a very shorter, simpler way. Just this, and you're talking to your camera. You won't even have to have a person do it for you. But I just think that especially in the age of TikTok, the bar of quality is much lower than you realize. And people are evaluating the content, what's being said more than the visual or even the sound. You could have a just screaming peak mic and they might still listen if what you're saying is good enough, But you got to put it out. That's the key. Put it out and get 2 likes and put it out again and keep trying until it finds your audience there.
So like quality over perfection.
Hard quality, like what I'm trying to reach people with. Because even for myself, putting out content for myself is something I wrestled about for a long time. And I was like, well, when I get better video, I'll do it. And I've learned so much in like 2 months of making content, more than I learned about video at my creative director job, because I'm doing it hands on, but you got to get the reps. It's all reps.
Yeah. Your stuff's good.
Thanks.
Yeah, you've grown pretty substantially in feels like 3 weeks. It's
Yeah, I started December with 30 followers. I'm up to like close to 800.
Yeah.
And I just have content it's like slow growth, evergreen content, I guess, which is cool. So just a day by day, shares and saves. And it's been really interesting to watch. And then I get to take those ideas and apply it back to what I'm doing in church. And so we're doing a bunch of trials at church and like trying to do different type of content. And it's been cool.
Yeah, no, that's sweet. And then the last question I have, and then I would love to also do a part 2 with you, but dive into a little bit more of like your personal creative process as somebody who's in church, but also branching out and doing some of these things outside of their building. But the last question for this one is, as we talked about all of the history of the church as well, and then what's going on today with social and some of the possibilities with it behind creative, what gives you hope for the future of church media?
One, I think that church media breaks down denominational barriers, which is pretty cool. Like there's a guy I follow, Faithful Dad. He's like a Pentecostal principal or something, day in the life type stuff. And I'm not Pentecostal in that sense, but I can see his stuff and be like, oh yeah, it's pretty much just like me. Like I think you can see a sermon clip any day and watch it and be like, that's a good word. And then you look and be like, oh wow, that's not the denomination I expected. And that's great. That's a really good thing. Or even the fact that Baptist churches are singing charismatic songs, it's more it's like a different type of cross-cultural, because we realize like maybe we're all more on the same team than we realize, we are all trying to get out this message, and we do have differences for sure, but the core stuff is pretty similar. And to me, that's encouraging. You could say it's competition, and there's some truth to that for sure. But I've even found in making content about church stuff that all types of denominations are following me, because I guess it applies to anyone who's just trying to get the gospel out, So if there was ever a time for a small church to make a big wave, is now. And that's really cool. That's not been the case,
I love that. All about unity. It's amazing. I love it. Well, Jacob, I really appreciate your time. It's been wonderful getting to talk to you and hear your story. And then I know that your church is probably so happy that you're there, because you're a rare breed in a world of people who have either malintentions or don't know what they're doing in this space. And so really appreciate your honesty and what you're doing for the kingdom. But yeah, let's get a part 2, because I would love to jump into a little bit more of you and your take on how to approach social media as a church leader outside of just making content for church. So I really appreciate your time. My less professional opinion is that you're a real cool dude.
Well, guys, thanks so much for listening. We are Done by Thursday podcast. I'm Samuel Greer with Stephen Bradley, and today we had Jacob Hayes. So tune in next time. We'll have a part 2 in the future, and we'll see you then.